Under the oppressive weight of twilight, my world shattered in a single, silent moment. I discovered that my wife, the person I cherished above all else, had been seduced by the very best friend I once trusted implicitly. A whispered conspiracy, forged in the dead of night, had ignited a betrayal so deep that my soul trembled at its revelation. Every beat of my heart echoed the sting of deception. Every breath I took was laced with the bitter taste of ruin. It was a betrayal that would haunt me, a spark that ignited a fierce, burning desire for retribution. I remember the exact moment I first sensed something was off. It wasn't a grand display of infidelity or a dramatic confession. It was the subtle shift in her smile, the lingering glances she exchanged with her closest friend, and the hushed phone calls that she hurriedly ended whenever I entered the room. I had always believed that trust was the cornerstone of our marriage, an unspoken pact sealed by years of shared laughter and tears. But that fragile trust was now splintering under the weight of secrets I never thought possible. Late one autumn evening, when the wind whispered through the bare branches outside and the world was draped in melancholy shadows, I found myself alone in the study. The soft hum of the old clock on the wall marked the passage of time, a steady rhythm that contrasted sharply with the chaos swirling within me. I sat at my desk, mind wandering through the labyrinth of our shared memories, trying desperately to pinpoint the moment when everything began to unravel. That is when I stumbled upon a series of texts on her phone, messages that were innocent on the surface but, when viewed in the context of our life, spoke volumes of a secret alliance. The words on the screen were like shards of glass, each one slicing through the veneer of our marital bliss. I could almost hear the hushed tone of her best friend's voice urging her on, a voice that once had been a comforting presence in our lives. Instead, it now rang with a venomous intensity, a conspiratorial murmur that hinted at long-buried desires and forbidden liaisons. In that moment, my heart pounded so fiercely I feared it might shatter entirely. The room grew colder, the silence more oppressive, as if the very air around me had turned to ice. 4 days afterward, I drifted through our home in a daze, haunted by a cacophony of thoughts and emotions that I could neither suppress nor fully express. Every corner of our shared space seemed tainted by the memory of that discovery. I wandered through our living room, where once the walls echoed with our laughter, now they only whispered of deceit and regret. I replayed every conversation, every shared secret, searching desperately for clues that might have hinted at this impending betrayal. And yet, nothing in the past had prepared me for the enormity of what I now faced. The betrayal wasn't solely the act of infidelity, it was the realization that the two people I trusted most had conspired to upend the life I thought we'd build together. My wife, with whom I had dreamed of growing old, had allowed herself to be swayed by the seductive promises of another. And her best friend, someone who had stood by her side through thick and thin, had not only encouraged her but had actively pushed her toward the edge of moral collapse. The sting of their collusion was unbearable, a double-edged betrayal that cut me from both sides. In the ensuing days, I struggled to maintain a facade of normalcy as I grappled with an overwhelming cocktail of anger, sorrow, and disbelief. I became a ghost in my own home, moving through the motions of daily life while my mind was consumed by the question, how could I have been so blind? The familiar patterns of our shared routines turned into painful reminders of a love that had been defiled. I sat at the dinner table staring blankly at my untouched food, the clink of cutlery and murmurs of conversation among family members offering no solace, only highlighting the gap that now existed between what was and what had become. The shock eventually gave way to a simmering rage that burned beneath the surface. I found myself obsessively poring over every scrap of digital evidence, every text and email, trying to reconstruct a narrative that could explain the unimaginable. Each new revelation was a nail in the coffin of our relationship, a testament to a betrayal so profound it left no room for excuses. I began to feel a deep, gnawing need for justice, not the kind that would only satisfy my wounded pride, but a retribution that could restore some semblance of balance to my shattered world. But in the midst of my turmoil, I also felt a stirring of clarity, a realization that if I were to reclaim my life, I needed to confront the truth head-on, however painful it might be. I resolved that silence was no longer an option. I had to face her, to force an honest confrontation that would force the secrets into the light. Yet, even as I prepared for this inevitable collision of worlds, I was tormented by conflicting emotions. Part of me craved the solace of ignorance, to pretend that the life I had known was intact. But deep down, I knew that the truth, as brutal as it was, held the only path toward healing. Late one night, after an agonizing day spent in tortured introspection, I found myself drafting a letter, a raw, unfiltered outpouring of my soul. The words flowed onto the paper in a torrent of emotions, capturing the betrayal, the heartbreak, and the relentless desire for answers. I wrote of how every smile she once gave now seemed a mask hiding guilt, every whispered secret now sounded like a lie carefully crafted to destroy the trust we once held sacred. I wrote about the irony of it all, that the people I had loved most were the ones who had conspired to break my heart. And with each word, I felt a small part of my old self slip away, replaced by a man hardened by betrayal yet determined to reclaim his dignity. In those pages, I laid bare not only the depth of my despair but also the seeds of a plan for revenge that, in its conception, promised to shatter the lives of both women who had betrayed me. I was consumed by a vision of retribution so vivid that it both horrified and empowered me. I envisioned a scenario where their collusion would be exposed, where every hidden conversation and secret rendezvous would come crashing down like a house of cards. The thought of their world collapsing, of the lies they had so carefully built being laid bare for all to see, ignited a fire within me, a fire that demanded action. That fire, however, was tempered by the realization that revenge, if it were to be my salvation, had to be executed with a precision that left no room for error. I began to study the patterns of their behavior, their routines, their vulnerabilities. I gathered every scrap of evidence with a meticulousness that surprised even me, each detail a potential lever in the elaborate machinery of my revenge. The more I learned, the more I felt a twisted sense of control over a situation that had once rendered me utterly powerless. In the quiet moments of night, when the weight of my discoveries pressed down on me like a leaden shroud, I felt that perhaps, just perhaps, I could rebuild myself from the ruins of our shared life, one calculated step at a time. Yet, even as I planned my course of action, I was painfully aware of the chasm that now separated us. The woman I once believed to be my partner had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and her best friend, the one who had urged her to stray, was now an accomplice in my sorrow. The betrayal was complete, a vicious triangle of deception that left me reeling and questioning everything. I recalled the countless times I had trusted her implicitly, the way she had confided in me without reservation, only to discover that those confessions had been the very tools used to manipulate her. And her best friend, oh, how I had admired her charm and loyalty, now revealed a darker, more treacherous side that I never could have imagined. As the days turned into restless nights, I oscillated between confronting her and sinking deeper into a void of despair. The idea of direct confrontation filled me with both dread and a morbid curiosity. I longed to see the look in her eyes when faced with the full weight of her betrayal, to hear her stammered apologies and watch the mask of pretense crumble away. But I also knew that such a confrontation could ignite a firestorm of emotions, one that might ultimately consume us all. So, I chose instead to retreat into the planning stages of my revenge, a meticulous, slow-burning process that promised to dismantle the lives of those who had torn mine apart. I began reaching out to contacts I'd long neglected, a former colleague, a tech-savvy acquaintance, anyone who could help me gather more evidence, who could aid in exposing the hidden truths that lurked beneath the surface of our lives. I immersed myself in research, learning the intricacies of digital footprints and the subtle art of forensic investigation. Each late-night session spent poring over data, every secret meeting arranged in the anonymity of a darkened parking lot, was a step further down a path that felt as inevitable as it was treacherous. There were moments when the enormity of my actions weighed on me, when I questioned whether the pursuit of revenge was worth sacrificing the last vestiges of my humanity. I recalled the promises of love and fidelity that had once defined our relationship and wondered if I could ever reclaim the innocence I had lost. But those moments were fleeting, replaced by a steely resolve that grew stronger with each passing day. The betrayal had not only shattered my trust, it had shattered my world. And from those ruins, I vowed, I would build something new, something unbreakable. Now, as I stand on the threshold of a new chapter defined by calculated retribution, I can feel the raw energy of my anger churning within me, a force as destructive as it is transformative. The planning is nearly complete, and with every carefully plotted move, I inch closer to the moment when their secrets will be exposed for all to see. This is not a path chosen out of mere vengeance, it is a desperate bid for redemption, a final attempt to reclaim the parts of me that were stolen away by their treachery. In the lingering silence of those long, sleepless nights, I have come to accept that the road ahead is fraught with moral complexities and the risk of becoming someone unrecognizable. Yet, the fire of betrayal burns too fiercely to allow me to stand idle in the face of such profound hurt. The impending storm of my revenge promises to leave both women in ruins, and while that outcome fills me with a bittersweet sense of inevitability, it also marks the end of an era, a final severance from the lies that once tethered my heart. I know that the journey ahead will test every fiber of my being, challenging me to balance the scales of justice with the cost of my own soul. But as I look into the mirror each morning, I see the face of a man reborn through fire, a man who has turned his anguish into a weapon and his despair into a driving force for change. The days to come will reveal whether my path to retribution will ultimately heal me or devour what remains of my identity. For now, I embrace the darkness as both a shield and a catalyst, ready to unleash a reckoning that will echo through the ruins of the lives of those who betrayed me. In the weeks following that searing night of discovery, I descended into a world of calculated retribution, a place where every secret, every whispered encouragement to betray, was meticulously recorded and catalogued. I became consumed with a singular purpose, to expose the treachery that had shattered my life and force both women to confront the full measure of their betrayal. The more I immersed myself in planning my revenge, the more I began to see every detail of their deceit with ruthless clarity. I was no longer the gentle husband who had once trusted without reserve. I was a man transformed by betrayal, with a steely resolve to make them feel the anguish I now carried like a scar. I spent countless nights in a makeshift office in the spare room of our home, a quiet sanctuary where I could comb through digital evidence and compile a dossier that would stand as undeniable proof of their collusion. Stacks of printed emails, text messages, and call logs became the pillars of my case. I watched video tutorials on digital forensics and consulted with a discreet acquaintance who was skilled in tracing electronic footprints. Every late-night session, fueled by bitter coffee and sleepless determination, was a step closer to dismantling the facade of their carefully constructed lives. I began to chart their daily routines with obsessive precision. I noted the times my wife would leave the house, the unusual places she'd visit, and the furtive meetings with her best friend, details that, when woven together, formed a damning tapestry of deception. I documented her visits to a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town, a place where she met with someone whose name I had come to know only through coded messages. I discovered that her best friend, once the embodiment of loyalty, had been her constant companion during these secret rendezvous, urging her to indulge in a passion that defied the sanctity of our marriage. The more I learned, the more a sense of grim satisfaction began to replace the raw pain. Each piece of evidence was a silent verdict against them, a reminder that their collusion was not an accident of fate, but a deliberate choice fueled by desire and a callous disregard for the love we once shared. I crafted a timeline of their clandestine meetings, a narrative of lies and seduction that stretched back months. With every entry, the outline of their betrayal became impossible to ignore. Yet, as the evidence mounted, I wrestled with the moral complexities of my own mission. Deep down, I knew that vengeance, though a natural response to betrayal, carried its own heavy toll. I was determined that my actions would not reduce me to a monster, but would instead serve as a catalyst for a long-overdue reckoning, a revelation that would force both of them to confront the consequences of their choices. In the cold light of my study, with the hum of a ceiling fan providing a steady background beat, I resolved that the time had come to put my plan into motion. I began by orchestrating a series of calculated moves designed to expose their secrets publicly. I compiled every piece of evidence into a comprehensive dossier, a veritable blueprint of their infidelities and the insidious manipulation behind them. I created a secure online archive, accessible only to a select circle of trusted confidants, friends who had once admired our marriage and who now deserved to know the truth. The archive was my digital declaration of war, a way to ensure that their deceit would not be confined to the shadows of our home. At the same time, I reached out to an old friend who had since become a respected local journalist. Over discreet meetings in dimly lit corners of quiet cafes, I recounted my harrowing experience, presenting the dossier with all its damning details. I could see in his eyes the weight of the truth I laid before him, a truth so raw and unyielding that it demanded to be broadcast. We agreed that the public deserved to know of the betrayal that had not only destroyed the sanctity of my marriage but also undermined the very foundations of trust that hold relationships together. Meanwhile, the tension in our household was reaching a boiling point. My wife, sensing that something was amiss, became increasingly distant and defensive. The warm, familiar light that once graced our home was replaced by an aura of cold suspicion and unease. Every conversation became a chess match of carefully chosen words and evasive glances. I could feel the storm of retribution gathering just beyond the horizon, a storm that would soon wash away all the pretense and leave nothing but the stark reality of their actions. The fateful day of reckoning arrived on a gloomy afternoon when the skies themselves seemed to mourn the impending fallout. I had arranged for a discreet meeting with the journalist, ensuring that the story would be released in the days to follow, sending shockwaves through our community. Simultaneously, I confronted my wife in our living room, a confrontation that was as heart-wrenching as it was inevitable. I laid out the evidence before her, piece by painstaking piece, watching her face drain of color as the truth became undeniable. Her best friend was not present, but the ghost of her involvement hung heavily in the air, a specter of guilt that no amount of denial could dispel. Her response was a tumult of tears, stuttered apologies, and hollow promises of explanations that did nothing to mend the ruptured trust. I saw in her eyes the realization that there was no escaping the consequences. With a cold resolve, I informed her that I had no intention of keeping our shared life in the dark any longer. I demanded that she own up to her actions, not just for my sake, but for the sake of accountability and the integrity of the relationships around us. The confrontation escalated quickly. Voices were raised, and accusations flew like shards of broken glass, each one leaving a mark on the fragile remnants of what was once a cherished union. I could feel the venom of my anger seeping into every word, but beneath it lay a profound sadness, a mourning for the love and trust that had been irrevocably shattered. I was not just fighting against her infidelity, but against the betrayal of a friendship that had turned sour, a betrayal that had been meticulously planned and ruthlessly executed. The aftermath of that explosive encounter was like watching a building crumble in slow motion. The walls of our home, once a sanctuary of shared dreams, now echoed with the sounds of broken promises and shattered illusions. My wife retreated into herself, her eyes haunted by the knowledge of her transgressions. The very air seemed charged with a mix of regret and defiance. And all the while, I felt the cold satisfaction of knowing that the first step toward a long-overdue reckoning had been taken. As the days wore on, news of the exposé began to ripple through our community. The journalist's article, raw, unflinching, and painfully detailed, struck a chord with many who had long yearned for truth in an age of carefully curated facades. I received messages of support from old friends and acquaintances who expressed both shock and sympathy, their words mingling with my own bitter satisfaction. The public unveiling of their collusion was a cathartic release, a moment of vindication that resonated deep within me. Yet, even as the truth spread like wildfire, I felt a deep, lingering sorrow. There was no celebration in the unraveling of our lives, only a profound mourning for the innocence lost and the relationships that would never be the same. But revenge, as I had learned it in the darkest hours of betrayal, is never a simple remedy. As the days turned into weeks, the initial shock of public exposure gave way to the long, arduous process of picking up the pieces of my broken self. The very act of exposing their lies had exacted a toll, not only on them, but on me as well. The echoes of their betrayal reverberated in every quiet moment, every reflective glance in the mirror. I found myself questioning whether the satisfaction of their downfall was worth the personal cost. Was this path of vengeance leading me to redemption, or was it dragging me further into the abyss of bitterness? I spent many sleepless nights grappling with these questions, my mind a battlefield where regret and resolve clashed in relentless duels. In the solitude of those moments, I began to realize that while revenge had brought a measure of justice, it had also left me with scars that might never fully heal. I watched as the fallout began to alter the lives of both women, my wife, whose world was now a labyrinth of regret and self-recrimination, and her best friend, whose once proud persona had crumbled into fragments of shame and isolation. Their public disgrace was complete, their reputations in ruins, and yet, as I observed from a distance, I felt an unexpected emptiness. The bitterness that had fueled my quest for retribution was slowly being replaced by a dawning understanding that revenge, no matter how justified it might seem, rarely restored what was lost. I attempted to fill that void by immersing myself in the work of rebuilding my own life. I reconnected with friends who had stood by me before the betrayal, and I sought solace in activities that had once brought me joy, running through early morning streets, losing myself in the pages of books, and even taking up painting as a way to express the kaleidoscope of emotions that now defined my days. Slowly, I learned to distinguish between the satisfaction of exposing their secrets and the deeper need to heal my own wounded heart. In quiet moments of reflection, I wondered if the cycle of vengeance would ever truly end. I recalled the passionate promises of love and fidelity we had once shared, and I mourned not only the loss of our marriage but also the collapse of a friendship that had once been my refuge. The public shaming of those who had betrayed me had, in a way, restored a semblance of balance, a cosmic justice that demanded accountability. Yet it also forced me to confront the painful reality that nothing, not even the most meticulously executed revenge, could undo the irreparable damage done to the foundations of trust. There were days when I visited our once shared haunts, the places where laughter and love had once mingled freely, now echoing only with the silent testimony of broken vows. In those moments, I felt a profound loneliness, a reminder that even as the world moved on, I remained tethered to memories that no amount of retribution could erase. I questioned whether my relentless pursuit of vindication was a way of holding on to the past rather than truly letting it go. And as I wrestled with these questions, I began to see that perhaps the true challenge was not in tearing down the ruins of our former lives, but in learning to build something new from their ashes. In the midst of this inner struggle, I reached out to a counselor, a compassionate guide who helped me navigate the tumultuous aftermath of betrayal and revenge. In our sessions, I was forced to confront the dual nature of my actions, the satisfaction of holding those who had betrayed me accountable, and the deep-seated pain that lingered beneath the surface. Through long, candid conversations, I began to see that my quest for revenge had been both a cry for justice and a desperate attempt to reclaim control over a life that had spiraled into chaos. I learned that healing was not a destination marked by the collapse of my enemies, but rather a slow, deliberate journey toward rebuilding my own identity, piece by fragile piece. As the public fallout continued, the community's response was a mix of sympathy, scandal, and harsh judgment. The local gossip mills churned out stories about the downfall of two women whose secrets had been laid bare for the world to see. I saw how their lives, once so intricately intertwined with mine, had been dismantled by the same forces of betrayal that had left me questioning everything. Yet amidst the swirling rumors and public outrage, I found an unexpected sense of liberation. The exposure of their collusion was a turning point, a moment when the lies could no longer be hidden, and when I, too, was forced to confront the parts of myself that had remained dormant for far too long. Standing at the crossroads of vengeance and self-discovery, I made the difficult decision to let go of the need for further retribution. I realized that my future would be defined not by the ruins of their deceit but by the strength I cultivated in overcoming it. In a final act of closure, I met with my wife one last time in a neutral setting. There, stripped of pretense and raw with honesty, we exchanged words that were both painful and necessary. I told her that while I could never forget the betrayal, I was determined to move forward and rebuild a life based on truth and self-respect, one that no longer hinged on the ghosts of our past. That conversation, though laced with tears and lingering bitterness, marked the beginning of a gradual thaw in the perpetual winter of my heart. I walked away with a bittersweet mix of relief and sorrow, aware that while the path to healing was far from complete, I had finally taken the first step toward reclaiming my identity. The journey ahead was uncertain, laden with the scars of a love defiled by treachery, but I was resolved to embrace it with the same fierce determination that had driven me to expose the truth. As I sit now, reflecting on the chaotic storm that was my quest for revenge, I understand that true justice is not found in the ruin of others but in the healing of one's own soul. The public exposure of their collusion served as a necessary reckoning, a moment when the weight of deceit was lifted from my shoulders. But it also left me with the stark realization that the process of healing requires forgiveness, not for the sake of condoning their actions, but for liberating myself from the relentless grip of anger. In the wake of their downfall, I have begun to rebuild a life that is distinctly my own. I am slowly learning that while the pain of betrayal may never fully vanish, it can be transformed into the strength needed to forge a new path, a path defined by authenticity, resilience, and the unyielding pursuit of inner peace. And though the ruins of their treachery will forever mark a chapter of my life, I now see them as the catalyst that spurred my transformation, a painful yet necessary crucible that ultimately taught me the true value of trust, integrity, and self-respect. In the cold, reflective aftermath of the public reckoning, I began the painstaking process of piecing together the remnants of my shattered identity. The fallout was a maelstrom of regret, anger, and a strangely liberating clarity, a state where every bitter memory and every sting of betrayal was transformed into a stepping stone toward something new. As the media frenzy slowly subsided, leaving behind echoes of scandal and whispered gossip in the corridors of our community, I was left alone with the consequences of a revenge that had cost us all dearly. But in that solitary space, amid the ruins of what was once a life steeped in trust and love, I sensed the tentative stirring of hope. For weeks, I lived in a surreal state of limbo. Every morning, I awoke with the weight of the past clinging to me like a relentless shadow, yet every night I lay down with the determination that tomorrow would bring the chance to rebuild. I began to see the scars on my heart not as permanent marks of failure, but as evidence of survival. Slowly, I sought out solace in the quiet corners of life, quiet walks along empty streets at dawn, moments spent listening to the hushed lullabies of nature, and evenings that I dedicated solely to the art of reflection. I poured my anguish and disillusionment into a journal, scribbling furiously until the ink on the pages became a testament to both my pain and my transformation. In the midst of this inner storm, I began to reconnect with parts of myself that had long lain dormant. I remembered a time before betrayal, before the venom of revenge had tainted my every thought, a time when I was not defined solely by the actions of others, but by my own passions, dreams, and the vibrant pulse of hope. I took up painting, a medium I had once loved but abandoned in the wake of our perfect life. With each brushstroke on a blank canvas, I released a little more of the anger and sorrow that had built up inside me. Colors bled into one another as I discovered that even the most turbulent emotions could give rise to something beautiful, something transformative. I also re-established old friendships and even forged new ones. I found that when I opened up about my journey, people listened with empathy, sharing their own tales of loss and renewal. In the warmth of these genuine connections, I felt my defenses slowly crumble. It was in the laughter of a friend over a shared meal, or the gentle comfort of a supportive word, that I began to sense the possibility of forgiveness, not as a way of excusing the betrayal, but as a means to free myself from the chains of perpetual bitterness. I learned that forgiveness was not a gift for them, but a reclaiming of my own inner peace. Every day, as I navigated the complexities of a world forever altered by deceit, I took deliberate steps toward reclaiming my autonomy. I attended counseling sessions with a therapist whose calm, measured wisdom helped me untangle the myriad threads of my emotions. In our conversations, I was encouraged to confront the pain head-on and to question the narratives that had bound me to an identity defined solely by betrayal and vengeance. Slowly, I began to understand that while the memories of that fateful betrayal would never entirely vanish, I could choose to let them serve as lessons rather than lifelong shackles. My therapist often reminded me that the process of healing was neither linear nor instantaneous. It was a journey marked by setbacks, small victories, and the gradual realization that I was stronger than the sum of my wounds. One pivotal moment came unexpectedly on a gray afternoon as I sat in a local cafe, sipping a cup of tea and watching the rain trace delicate patterns on the window. A stranger, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, struck up a conversation with me. He shared his own story of heartbreak and the long, winding path to recovery. His words, delivered with quiet conviction, resonated deeply with me. In that simple exchange, I realized that the human spirit possesses an extraordinary capacity to heal, even when the scars run deep. That day, I made a silent promise to myself. I would honor my past by forging a future where trust and love could flourish again, tempered by the hard-won wisdom of experience. As I moved further along this road of renewal, the final confrontation with my wife, once the nexus of my despair, became a turning point that I now look back upon with a mixture of sorrow and resolve. Our last meeting was not a battle of accusations or bitter recriminations. Rather, it was a subdued exchange filled with regret, lingering apologies, and an unspoken acknowledgement that our paths were destined to diverge. In that quiet, emotionally raw moment, I realized that clinging to the ruins of our past would only impede my own journey toward wholeness. I chose to let go, not out of weakness, but as a courageous act of self-liberation. I wished her well, not because I forgave the betrayal in the conventional sense, but because I recognized that her own road was paved with as many missteps and regrets as mine. Our lives, once so deeply intertwined, were now irreparably severed, and the only way to honor what we had been was to move forward, separately and resolutely. The public fallout that followed had been a maelstrom in its own right, a reminder that the consequences of revenge rippled far beyond the immediate circle of betrayal. Friends, neighbors, and even distant acquaintances weighed in on the scandal with a mixture of shock and pity. Yet, amid the external clamor, I found that my greatest struggle was internal, the need to reconcile the man I had become with the man I had once been. I spent long nights writing letters that I never sent, letters addressed to the past, to the woman who had once been my partner, and to the friend who had played a part in our unraveling. In those letters, I poured out my deepest regrets, my bitter disappointments, and the tentative glimmers of forgiveness. They were raw, unfiltered expressions of a soul in search of healing, and over time, they became the blueprint for rebuilding my life. Gradually, the overwhelming bitterness that had once consumed me began to recede, replaced by a cautious optimism. I learned to appreciate the beauty in small, everyday moments, the gentle murmur of a favorite song, the warmth of a sunrise that promised a new beginning, and the unexpected kindness of strangers. I discovered that the act of living, of truly living, was in itself an act of defiance against the darkness that had once threatened to overwhelm me. Every day was a victory, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. One particularly transformative experience occurred during a weekend retreat at a secluded mountain lodge, far removed from the clamor of everyday life. Surrounded by the serene majesty of towering pines and the quiet cadence of a nearby stream, I found myself immersed in a kind of introspective solitude that was both humbling and liberating. In the stillness of those days, I practiced meditation and mindfulness, allowing myself to fully experience the spectrum of emotions that had defined my recent past without judgment or resistance. It was as if nature itself was whispering the secret that every ending is, in fact, a precursor to a new beginning. I left that retreat with a renewed sense of purpose and a deep, abiding certainty that I could rebuild my life from the ashes of what had been. Returning home, I channeled my newfound energy into creative pursuits. I joined a local art collective, where I met people from all walks of life who, like me, had known loss and were striving to create beauty out of pain. We organized exhibitions that showcased not only our art but our stories, narratives of struggle, resilience, and the transformative power of self-expression. In sharing my journey with others, I discovered that vulnerability could be a source of strength, a bridge that connected me to kindred spirits who understood the profound challenges of healing. These artistic endeavors became a vital part of my recovery, a way to communicate the inexpressible, to capture on canvas the bittersweet melody of a heart reborn. In the quiet evenings that followed, I would often sit by the window and gaze out at the fading light, reflecting on the tumultuous journey that had brought me to this point. The man I saw in the mirror was not the one who had been consumed by rage and despair, but someone who had learned to harness the pain of betrayal and transform it into something meaningful. I no longer sought to define myself solely by the actions of others or by the mistakes of our shared past. Instead, I embraced the complexity of my emotions, acknowledging that the scars I carried were not just reminders of what had been lost, but also symbols of my capacity to endure, to evolve, and ultimately, to forgive. I began to see forgiveness not as an act of condoning the wrongs done to me, but as an essential step in freeing myself from the relentless grip of bitterness. In forgiving, I reclaimed the part of me that had been captive to the darkness, a part that yearned to love, to trust, and to open itself to the possibility of new beginnings. This internal transformation was gradual, sometimes agonizing, but ultimately empowering. I learned that the path to healing was paved not with the ruins of revenge, but with the deliberate, often painful, choices to let go and move forward. In time, the community that had once been abuzz with scandal began to fade into the background. The relentless cycle of gossip and judgment was replaced by a quiet understanding that life, in all its messy, unpredictable beauty, marches on. I began to reconnect with the simple pleasures, a weekend drive to the countryside, long conversations with friends over dinner, and the liberating act of starting each day with gratitude for the resilience that had carried me through the storm. With every small step, I felt my heart growing lighter, my spirit more attuned to the rhythm of hope and renewal. Looking back on those dark days, I now understand that the agony of betrayal had been a crucible, a painful, transformative experience that, while it tore apart my world, also forged within me a strength I never knew existed. The revenge that once consumed me, the meticulous plan to bring down the lives of those who had betrayed my trust, has become a distant memory, a necessary chapter in a story that has since evolved into one of self-discovery and redemption. I have come to realize that true justice is not measured by the ruin of others, but by the ability to rise above the pain and rebuild a life that is authentically, unapologetically my own. Today, as I continue on this journey of healing and renewal, I carry with me the lessons of my past, the importance of transparency, the value of trust, and the strength that comes from embracing both the light and the darkness within. I have learned that while betrayal may leave scars, those scars are not permanent prisons. Instead, they serve as reminders of the battles fought and the resilience born from adversity. I am no longer defined solely by the pain inflicted by the choices of others. I am defined by the courage to rebuild, the determination to forgive, and the unwavering belief that even from the deepest ruins, a phoenix can rise. Now, in the gentle embrace of a new dawn, I step forward with a heart that has been tempered by fire, a heart that beats not in spite of its wounds, but because of them. I honor my past by living fully in the present, cherishing every moment of beauty, every smile, every quiet act of kindness that signals the promise of a brighter tomorrow. And as I look to the horizon, I see not the shadows of what was lost, but the radiant glow of a future crafted by my own resilience and the unyielding power of hope. This is my story, a narrative of betrayal, retribution, and ultimately, of rebirth. It is a testament to the indomitable spirit of a man who, despite having his world torn asunder, chose to rebuild from the ruins and discover the profound strength within. Each day is a new chapter, a canvas on which I paint the vibrant hues of recovery and the quiet triumph of the human heart over despair. And though the scars of yesterday remain, they now shine as emblems of survival, a reminder that even in the wake of the most devastating betrayal, the capacity to love, to forgive, and to rise again endures. In the end, I have learned that revenge, while momentarily satisfying, is a fleeting balm compared to the enduring peace that comes from self-forgiveness and the acceptance of our own imperfect humanity. As I continue to navigate this winding road, I do so with gratitude for every painful lesson and every unexpected blessing that has guided me toward a life filled with authenticity and hope. The ruins of the past have given way to the fertile soil of a new beginning, and from that soil, I am cultivating a future defined not by the betrayals of others, but by the beauty and strength of my own restored spirit. This is my new dawn, a promise to myself that no matter what shadows may lurk behind, I will always find the light within to guide me home.